So like with the previous serial, the Web of Fear was rediscovered in 2011, with all 6 episodes being found alongside the enemy of the world. But before it could be returned to the archives, an episode went mysteriously missing. This means we're left with 5 out of 6 episodes, making it one of the missing serials closest to completion. There is an animation, but it's very notorious, an experiment in 3D animation which just baffles the mind as to how some of the motion capture was done, but I'll talk more about the missing episode in time and the circumstances of its disappearance. We've got the return of the Yeti, an odd dating issue, and the introduction of one of the show's most iconic characters, plus the return of one of the show's best directors after a long break after the show's 12-episode epic. So that's enough initial praise, and let's get into it. So we begin where the previous serial left off, with the TARDIS doors still open and the trio in danger of being sucked out into the vortex. With some effort, Jamie is able to shut the doors, which saves the trio. It's somewhat of a dull ending to this plot point, but it serves this purpose, and it is a unique opening for a serial, which is something. This leads to them preparing to travel somewhere else.
Here we go again.
I wonder what it'll be this time.
Yes, I wonder.
From there we leave the trio for a bit and move to Earth, where we are reunited with Professor Travers and the Abominable Snowmen, who is at the home of Julius Silverstein, who owns a robot Yeti, which Travers brought back from Tibet. We learn a few things here. For one, Travers has married and had a daughter called Anne, and that he brought back a control sphere with the Yeti, which has gone missing, with him having experimented on it for years, with him being at Silverstein's house to try and retrieve the Yeti, due to the danger of the control sphere on the loose. Of course Silverstein isn't having any of this, believing Travers just wants it to sell to a higher bidder, and so forces Travers out of his house. This happening as the control sphere breaks in, leading to it to return to the Yeti and somehow make it into a Mark II. This entire scene is just amazing. For whatever reason, it was all done on film, and so has the benefits of that. There's strong atmospheric lighting with a haunting score, and a real sense of dread being built. It sets a real creepy tone for the serial going forwards, with Douglas Camfield showing off his skills again, and that he's still got it after a long break. This of course continues throughout the serial. This opening scene really shows this off right from the bat. The rest of episode 1 takes place in 2 locations, the TARDIS and the London Underground. The TARDIS has been captured by some force while in space, while London has been evacuated and soldiers are fighting a war under the city. The TARDIS plotline ends with the Doctor using a device to shift their materialisation a short distance from where it's planned to be, which means whatever force was holding them loses track of them. From here they find a dead man who is covered in webbing and learn that the Underground is non-operational. Now the sets of the London Underground are great in this serial, especially when on film. They're incredibly realistic and detailed, which means I have to talk about the controversy around them. So as the story goes, the production team asked for permission to film in the actual London Underground, and this was refused. So they had to build sets which were so convincing that they tricked the actual London Underground into thinking the production had filmed there without permission. For a show that's known for being cheap with terrible sets, it really goes to show how amazing the designers and set builders were when pushed. This is one of those serials where the production team really went all out and shone, and proved just how dedicated they were to making this show. This quality just continued throughout the serial, giving us some of the best visuals in terms of both set and direction that the series has ever had. There are plenty of scenes set in the Underground which are filmed instead of being recorded, and these are the ones which make the sets look the best. But even when the scenes are in the recording studio, they still look great, with the low lighting helping with this. But if I keep talking about how good the serial looks and don't get on with the plot, we'll be here for quite some time, especially since there is a lot to talk about with the plot. So the trio are split up, with the Doctor encountering some Yeti who are covering some explosives with webbing, while Jamie and Victoria end up with the military, where they meet Travers. The explosives are to be used to collapse the tunnels to stop the Yeti, with them being set off while the Doctor is still around them. This gives us the episode 1 cliffhanger, with the Doctor potentially being killed in the blast, although we soon learn that the explosion didn't happen as planned, with the webbing containing the blast. This leaves the Doctor missing for episode 2, this being because Troughton had a holiday that week. Where he is during episode 2 isn't exactly addressed, because he either would have had to have been moved or left the area before the soldiers investigated. With the implication that he was unconscious after the failed explosion, it means something must have moved him, and yet didn't follow the cable back to the fortress. Now we learn who he has been with during episode 3, but in universe it does seem a bit iffy as to ask why he wasn't in episode 2 in any capacity, even as an unconscious man on a stretcher. It doesn't break the story, but it's a bit odd. Episode 2 mostly builds up distrust between the trio and the military, with Travers in the middle, and being suspicious while Travers is on their side throughout. This is something which continues into the later episodes, when there's reason to believe there's a spy in the fortress, but we'll get to the spy in a bit. Fortunately, due to Troughton's holiday being very early in the serial, it means that the plot can get a lot of the exposition out of the way. It does mean that the episode isn't throwaway, which is good, even if the pace is a bit slower. Things really pick up again with episode 3. Victoria has run away in search of the Doctor, while Jamie has become split up and is with attempted deserter Evans. Evans was the driver for the convoy that was bringing supplies to the fortress, but it was attacked with him and the Colonel being the only survivors, the Colonel having met with the Doctor off screen, this Colonel being one Colonel Lethbridge Stewart. So the Doctor gets introduced here and meets with Victoria before heading back to the fortress with the Colonel, who takes command. This leads to a series of plans to stop the Yeti, including trying to collapse the tunnel multiple times, trying to recover the TARDIS, trying to examine the webbing, and finally trying to control the Yeti. All of these bar the final fail for one reason or another. Most of these failures are due to sabotage, which leads into a plotline about there being someone in the base under the control of the intelligence. So there's a few suspects throughout, but everyone is considered potentially guilty until the final episode, with people splitting off into the groups they trust. But one of the first things we know about the spy is that it's a man due to a shot of the hands, which destroyed my original theory about who it could be, as the shot of the hands is in the missing episode 3, so it was less noticeable than it would have been otherwise. Towards the beginning of the plotline, the majority of the suspicion falls on the reporter named Chorley, but he soon disappears after going to find the TARDIS. There's not much to say about Chorley. He's a reporter who was sent down to report on the military's efforts against the webbing. He's basically just there to get on everyone's nerves and to be a red herring. He disappears quite early in the serial, but does return towards the end. Once he disappears, suspicion falls on Evans due to him trying to leave whenever possible, and then a sample of the webbing disappears with him being the only person who could have taken it, in the eyes of the Doctor. Of course, it turns out not to be Evans, with it being revealed to be in fact Staff Sergeant Arnold, who was being controlled by the intelligence. Now, prior to watching, I originally thought it was Travers, as during the Abominable Snowmen, he had an encounter with the intelligence, so for a few years I assumed he was the one responsible for the Yeti's return. Then when it was clear he wasn't, I thought it was in fact Anne. This is due to her being present for enough of the event to have sabotaged them, or to have taken the Yeti statues, and this was still working on my idea of the intelligence having returned through Travers somehow. Even so, the twist I was Arnold in the end makes enough sense, although I'm still confused as to what happened to the webbing, as it's implied it was stolen, but I don't see any opportunity where Arnold could have known about the webbing in the tin, so maybe it just disintegrated. Either way, adding in this twist as to who the intelligence is controlling does strengthen the serial, as there's something at the back of your minds as the plot is progressing. Although the serial doesn't explain how the intelligence gained initial control of the Yeti, given that the tech which controlled the Yeti spheres had been destroyed in the previous serial. There is the possibility that Arnold had been controlled for far longer than the Doctor theorised, with him suggesting that Arnold had died early in the invasion, which is why the intelligence used his body as a vessel. So the details of how the initial invasion began aren't important to the serial, but from what information we are given, we really aren't told how the invasion began. With the twist villain covered, let's move on to some of the characters. We'll begin with the Colonel. So as a character, the Colonel is your average military character, although he's more easily swayed than most by the Doctor's ideas and what he says. While there are times he doesn't trust him due to the spy aspect of the serial, he generally sides with the Doctor's ideas as he's the only one who seems to understand the situation. Beyond that, we don't know much about the Colonel, as he's just the head military character for the serial, taking over from Captain Knight. But anyone who knows where the show goes knows that this isn't the end for him. On the more general military characters, there isn't much to say about them. The main ones are the Colonel, Evans and Arnold, who I've already covered. There is a good sense of them being people outside of the serial, with them being given a good sense of humour at times, or just being charismatic despite the situation. I don't really have anything to say about them because of this. They are somewhat good for the world building, even with the skewed view of them being from the military. Either way, it's the closest thing to an outside view we get in the serial, so it is what it is. Equally, I haven't got anything to say about Chorley. He's a reporter which should sum him up. He's annoying, gets in people's way, pokes his nose in wherever he wants, even when someone says no, and as soon as the chance to escape comes, he ditches for his own life, but somehow survives in the tunnels until the end of the serial. Next up is the Travers, who are the most interesting characters in the serial. Obviously we have Professor Travers, who is now 40 years older, with him having switched from studies of the Yeti to a technical background. This is due to his studies of the robot Yetis and trying to get them to work again. His daughter Anne followed in his footsteps, with her being a very good technician, being a great help to the Doctor throughout. Right from the start she makes a strong impression, especially when asked why she became a scientist by Captain Knight.
What's a girl like you doing in a job like this?
Well, when I was a little girl, I thought I'd like to be a scientist, so I became a scientist.
Throughout the serial she keeps this wit and due to her technical abilities is able to help the Doctor in a unique way. Beyond that she has her dynamic with Travers, which isn't the most expanded on, but it's interesting to see the child of someone the Doctor has interacted with, as it allows for them to have their entire life shook up as they realise they've been disbelieving the story they've been told all their life. This feels like the only time this happens in the show, or at least in these early years. Her dynamic with the Doctor is great, with them both being scientists. They spend a lot of time in the latter half of the serial together, trying to figure out what the Yeti are doing and then making machines to stop them, including a Yeti control device and a device which disconnects them from the control of the intelligence. Throughout this section there is some great back and forth, and while this is maybe just me, I swear there is a slight romance between them at times, notably when they're facing a Yeti and try to sort out who's holding what. This is far more to do with their performances rather than the dialogue itself, but I still find it noteworthy. This does make Anne a bit more interesting than most one-off characters, as there is a hint of a bigger dynamic she could have had with the Doctor if they'd met again, and it's unfortunate they didn't. Either way, this is a great character who's a joy to watch. On the Doctor, he is maybe at his best here. Obviously we have his usual playing the idiot and then switching to smart moments, which are played great by Troughton as ever, but here it goes further than usual, with him having even stronger moments when he's showing off his knowledge. While with Van or his companions he generally shows off his more idiotic side, but whenever with a military man he goes completely serious. The best scene of the Doctor's serious side in this serial is where he's describing the intelligence of the Colonel. Troughton is always strong when it comes to facial expressions, and this is something Douglas Camfield clearly understood, as there are several times in the serial where we get close-ups of the Doctor as he is thinking or talking in a serious manner. These shots are some of the best in the serial, and they really elevate Trayton's already great performance. Combining this showing of his serious side with his technical side gives us a great insight into this incarnation and his abilities. It's probably this incarnation's best showing so far, with his knowledge of the intelligence coming in useful for this rematch, leading to him finding a way to defeat it, although this doesn't go to plan. Jamie is just as strong as ever, spending a decent chunk by himself or with soldiers. It means we get to see him showing off his more do-something nature. He doesn't do a lot in the grand scheme of things, but is important at the climax of the serial, with him using the control jetty to attack Arnold in order to save the Doctor. It's a good showing for Jamie, with plenty of his more humorous and brave moments, notably when he and the Colonel are trying to hold back the door when the fortress is being invaded by the webbing. His dynamic with the Doctor is on point as ever. We of course have the train track scene, where we also have him casually dropping a device which will save their lives, and him paying no interest in Victoria as he's too busy with the fact that the TARDIS has seemingly landed. Plus, of course, he is the one who saved all of them from being sucked out into the vortex at the start. Now we have Victoria, who likewise is as strong as ever, but even so she does feel like the weakest of the trio. She's at her best in the first few episodes, for a few reasons, partly due to her giving away information while being separated from the Doctor, which leads to her revealing the existence of the TARDIS. Plus her scenes with Anne when she thinks she might be responsible for the Yeti invasion, although Professor Travers does defend her, and acts in a fatherly way towards her when concerned about the apparent deaths of both the Doctor and Jamie. She goes off on her own, which is surprisingly brave of her, and the serial does continue the good characterisation of her fear, with her being less afraid in general and more generally nervous. This does continue to make her stand out against the predecessors, even if she does continue to be a screamer, although it feels less pronounced and better used. She does end up as a damsel in distress at the end, with her being captured by Travers while he's under the power of the intelligence. This leads to her both not doing a lot in the last 2 episodes, other than leaving a trail for the others to follow, but it does give her more time with Professor Travers, which gives us some great scenes as he tries to make her escape, but she refuses. This dynamic is obviously strengthened by the fact that Travers is played by Jack Watling, the father of Deborah Watling, something I didn't mention in my Abominable Snowmen review. This is something which feels clear in some scenes, where his own instincts are coming through his performance, especially when they're alone in the intelligence's control room. This connection behind the scenes really makes their scenes stronger. Finally, we have the Great Intelligence itself, who is a bit of a non-character until the final part, as it doesn't appear until the cliffhanger of episode 4 when it takes over Travers, then not again until the very end with the reveal that Arnold was the spy. This doesn't hinder the serial, as we already know it's the intelligence, and since they hold back on its motivations and its ultimate goal, it does work to increase the tension as it's nowhere to be found. On the other hand, it does mean that we have to wait quite a while before we have any idea of what the intelligence wants with London, as there are no hints whatsoever until the reveal by the controlled Travers, that being that it wants the Doctor. So the plan of the intelligence is not revenge, viewing that as a human concept. Instead, its plan is to absorb the Doctor's intelligence into itself, which would revert the Doctor into a child mentally. Now this is a very unique and interesting plan for a villain. Not the usual killing or domination, but instead to use the Doctor's own intelligence to their advantage, which could lead to who knows what for the intelligence. This plan does end up failing due to Jamie, who has the control jetty destroy the machine, which blows up Arnold and separates the intelligence from Earth. But as we later learn, the Doctor didn't want this to happen, as he had previously messed with the helmet, so the process was reversed, meaning he would have absorbed the intelligence. This is an interesting and risky plan for the Doctor, but due to Jamie's interference it ultimately means that the intelligence is still out there. While this is a core resolution to the plot, it does have a problem. That being that since the Doctor was so certain that his plan of switching a few wires around would have defeated the intelligence, it means that he might as well have been captured by the intelligence at the end of episode 1, and the plot would have wrapped up without all the deaths. Production-wise, this is an incredible serial. I've already talked about Camfield's direction in episode 1 and how it strengthened Troughton's performance, but throughout it's strong, notably in how he was able to use the sets, as despite their small number and size, Camfield managed to make the size of the underground feel massive and expansive. This is all helped by the dark and creepy atmosphere, which really makes you wonder what is about to happen at any moment. I think the direction does a lot more of the work when it comes to the atmosphere in the serial, which just speaks to Camfield's abilities. There is also some location filming done, with a battle taking place in the deserted streets of London. Now there isn't a sense of the place having been abandoned in a hurry, but the scene is great. Seeing the Colonel and his men unable to do anything against the Yeti as they advance, oddly with the Sidemen theme playing, really helps to make them terrifying. This battle scene is really strong in terms of both its place in the story and the direction, and it's something we really haven't seen since the War Machines. Another thing to note about the battle is the appearance of several stunt actors, notably Terry Walsh, who would later go on to be a main stuntman for the show going forward. This isn't his first appearance, as he was previously in The Smugglers, although with that missing, this is his first appearance in the surviving serial. On the behind the scenes, we have a new script editor, Derek Sherwin, taking over from Peter Bryant, who is now the show's producer. So I haven't discussed Bryant's role in the show before, entirely due to how confusing the producer and script editor role was for the first chunk of the season, with Bryant being the producer for Tomb of the Sidemen, but script editor for the rest of the season, while Victor Pemberton was the script editor temporarily. Bryant took over as the script editor during Evil of the Daleks, and so the credit was changed partway through, with Bryant taking over from episode 4. His temporary time as producer for Tomb was a test run for him to later take over. Although apparently Pemberton was script editor from Evil through to Ice Warriors, but was only credited for Tomb, so I've no idea what was going on during this period, and so left it all to Bryant's final takeover. The next thing to discuss is the serial's missing status. So as explained at the start, the entire serial was rediscovered in 2011, but as we all know, episode 3 wasn't returned to the archives and is still missing today. Now the reason for this is a well-known story, as when the episodes were discovered by Philip Morris, all 6 episodes of the serial were together, but while he was arranging for their return, episode 3 went missing. Due to this, he began a new search for the episode, which is what delayed the reveal of the rediscovery until 2013. It's unknown what happened to the episode, but it's believed that since they were rediscovered, someone found out and took the episode to sell. Given the choice of episode which was taken, this is quite likely due to episode 3 featuring the first appearance of Lethbridge Stewart. So this means that to this day, the serial remains incomplete, but at the same time it means that that episode is still out there somewhere, presumably in the hands of a private collector. The last thing to discuss is the dating issue I mentioned. So this serial confirms that The Abominable Snowmen took place in 1935, while this serial takes place 40 years later in 1975. Now at the time this wasn't important, as a few serials had taken place in the near future of Earth, notably the previous serial. But in this unique case, it would go on to cause a massive dating problem when the colour era began. This will of course come up more when we get to that, as there are several serials which bring up dates which conflict with this, but for the moment it's something to keep in mind. So Web of Fear is a great serial. While it does have a few problems in terms of how the intelligence returned and got his plan going so quickly, that really doesn't hinder the story. More importantly, it doesn't slow during the last few episodes like its predecessor did, which really helps the pace and keeps the viewer engaged right to the end. It's a big improvement over the original in terms of the script, but beyond that, it sees the return of one of the show's best directors, who does his usual great work to create a stellar show in terms of its appearance, with featuring some of the best sets ever, and introducing one of the show's most iconic characters, even if nobody knew that at the time. But next time, the TARDIS lands back on Earth, with the trio being faced by an enemy unlike any they've faced before, as the danger comes from deep within the planet itself. Next time, Fury from the Deep.